Jack Carter, a retired factory worker, receives a box of mahogany cigars as a birthday present from his estranged daughter, Emily. But after he gives them to his best friend, Richard, who nearly dies from poisoning, Jack realizes that the cigars were not a gift, but a plot to kill him, so that Emily can inherit his fortune and insurance. Before we start the story, leave a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And at the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. The box sat on my porch, like a silent riddle-polished mahogany with gold trim glinting faintly in the autumn sun. No return address, no explanation. Just a neat little card resting on top with 2 words written in familiar sharp handwriting, "Happy Birthday." My breath caught. Emily. It had been years since I'd seen her name, let alone a gift. We hadn't spoken in so long that I'd nearly forgotten what her voice sounded like, though not the silence that replaced it. I turned the card over in my hands, tracing the deliberate strokes of each letter. My daughter's hand. I couldn't mistake it. The box was heavier than it looked. Inside lay 10 Cuban cigars, rare and expensive, the kind men like me used to save for milestones or poker nights with old friends. The kind I had given up 2 years ago after pneumonia nearly emptied my lungs for good. Emily knew that, or she should have. I set the cigars on the table, my fingers brushing the velvet lining as if it were something alive. It was a strange gift from a daughter who hadn't asked about my health in years. For a moment, a dangerous flicker of hope sparked inside me. Maybe this was her way of reaching back across the gap between us. A peace offering. A reminder that somewhere deep down, I was still her father. That night I drove over to see Richard Hale, her father-in-law. He still smoked like the world wasn't out to punish lungs. "Happy birthday" to me, I joked, handing him the box. Courtesy of Emily. Richard laughed, clapped me on the back, and lit one right there in his den, the smoke curling into the lampshade glow. I told myself that maybe this was right. Maybe Emily had meant to connect me with old friends again, to bridge the years with something as simple as a cigar. But the next morning, Richard collapsed. I got the call from his wife just as the November wind was cutting through my jacket. "Jack," she gasped. "He's in the hospital. They said it wasn't his heart. They said it was something he smoked." I felt the words hammer into my chest. At the hospital, antiseptic hung in the air, mingling with fear. Richard lay on the bed, pale, and barely breathing, machines hissing and beeping like they were the only things tethering him to this world. His wife sat in the corner with a paper cup of coffee trembling in her hands. They said it wasn't an illness, she whispered, eyes wide. It was poison. I stared at him, then at her, then down at my own hands. The mahogany box flashed in my mind like a cruel trick of memory. My birthday gift. Emily's handwriting. The cigars I had passed along. The truth slid in sharp and cold. Those cigars weren't meant for Richard. They were meant for me. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in my recliner with the card in my hands, staring at the words, "Happy Birthday." Sharp, deliberate letters. No warmth, no signature, just the echo of my daughter's hand. Memories attacked me like ghosts, Emily. As a little girl running barefoot in the yard, her hair in braids, laughing until she couldn't breathe. Emily climbing onto my lap while I puffed a cigar on warm summer evenings, her tiny finger tracing maps on my chest as if she were charting a world she believed was safe. But that little girl was gone. In her place was a woman I barely recognized, a woman who had chosen silence over family calculation, over love. A woman who might have sent me a box of death dressed as a birthday gift. The house groaned under the weight of its emptiness, the same silence that had lived here since Martha passed. I set the box on the kitchen table, the gold trim gleaming mockingly under the light. By midnight, my chest ached not from illness, but from the truth my daughter had remembered me, yes, but only enough to remember what she might gain when I was gone. And in that moment, I understood survival was no longer about illness, no longer about outlasting time. Survival now meant outlasting Emily. The machines in Richard's hospital room hummed a steady rhythm, a fragile song between life and death. His chest rose and fell shallow but determined, as if his body hadn't yet decided whether to stay or to leave. Tubes ran from his arms, monitors blinked, and the smell of antiseptic burned my nose. I stood at his bedside, staring at the pale man I'd known for decades, my oldest friend, and the unintended victim of a gift never meant for him. His wife sat slumped in a chair at the corner of the room, hands wrapped around a styrofoam cup of lukewarm coffee. She looked up at me with eyes full of accusation, though her lips trembled too much to form the words. "They said it wasn't his heart," she whispered finally, voice raw. "It was something he smoked." The words twisted in my gut. I didn't need her to finish the sentence, I already knew. My hand brushed my jacket pocket, where the card still sat, folded the one with Emily's handwriting, sharp and deliberate happy birthday. The mahogany box, the gold trim, the cigars, my birthday gift. Except it hadn't been a gift. It had been a death sentence. I leaned closer to Richard, taking in the hollow of his cheeks, the shallow rasp of his breathing. "Hold on, old friend," I muttered, my throat tight. "Don't you dare let her win. Because if Richard died, his blood would be on my hands as much as hers." I walked out of that hospital with the November wind cutting like knives across my face. Each breath burned in my scarred lungs, reminding me of the pneumonia that had nearly ended me years before. I hadn't touched tobacco since. Emily knew that. She had to know that. So why would she send cigars? Why now, after years of silence? At home, I set the empty mahogany box on the kitchen table. Its gold trim caught the light, mocking me. I picked up the card again, staring at the words over and over until they blurred. Happy birthday. No signature, no warmth, just her hand. I sat there until midnight, the house creaking around me, silence pressing in heavy as grief. Since Martha passed, silence had been my only companion. Now it seemed louder, accusing. I couldn't carry it alone anymore. The next morning I drove to the police station. The building looked smaller than I remembered. Brick walls weathered the American flag, flapping lazily in the cold wind. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as officers moved between desks. Detective Morales met me in the lobby. She was in her 40s, sharp-eyed, with a voice that carried the kind of authority that didn't need to shout. "You're saying your daughter sent you cigars, and the man who smoked them is in the ICU," she repeated, slowly, arms crossed. "Yes." My voice came out steadier than I felt. Doctor said it wasn't an illness, said it was poison. And that box, I slid it across her desk, the mahogany wood glinting in the light. That's where they came from. She opened it, sniffed the wood, then leaned back in her chair. "We'll run tests." "But Mr. Carter, this is a serious accusation. Are you certain your daughter sent them?" I locked eyes with her. I know her handwriting. A father never forgets. Morales studied me for a long moment, then jotted something in her notebook. "We'll need to confirm." That night, sleep never came. Every creak of the house felt like a whisper. Every shadow on the wall seemed to bend into Emily's face. I sat in my recliner staring at the ceiling, wondering when exactly my daughter had stopped being my daughter and become whatever she was now. At 2 a.m., the phone rang. I snatched it up, my heart pounding. Jack Richards' wife. Her voice was shaky but lighter this time. "They say he's stable. But the doctors, they confirmed it wasn't natural. It was something in the cigar. The air drained from my lungs. I thanked her and hung up. Outside on the porch, I gripped the railing with both hands, staring into the dark yard. The night was silent except for a distant dog barking. My breath clouded in the cold air, but inside me something burned. "Emily," I whispered into the dark. "Why would you try to erase me?" 2 days later, Morales called. Her tone was clipped professional, but I caught the shadow beneath it. We ran tests. The cigars were laced with aconitine, a rare plant toxin, extremely lethal even in small doses. I said nothing. "Mr. Carter," she continued, "is there any reason your daughter would want you dead?" The question echoed in my chest, bouncing between memory and grief. I thought of the times Emily had asked about my pension, the casual remarks about life insurance, the way she distanced herself after her marriage, only reaching out when money was on the table. "She has her reasons," I muttered. Morales's voice sharpened. "We need to hear them." That evening the phone rang again. Emily. Her voice was sweet, too sweet. "Dad, did you get my gift?" My knuckles turned white around the receiver. "Yes, I did." "Did you try one?" She asked, a hint of expectation in her tone. "No," I said evenly. "I gave them to Richard." A pause. Then a brittle laugh. "Well, I suppose that works too." Something in her tone sent a chill through me, the kind that settles into bone. After we hung up, I sat in silence for hours, replaying every word. That night, as the wind rattled the windows and the empty mahogany box glimmered faintly under the kitchen light, I knew with certainty what I'd been trying not to believe. Richard wasn't the target. I was. I didn't call her back. I called Morales. By mid-morning, I was in the same chair across from her desk, the mahogany box and the birthday card sealed inside a clear evidence bag between us. She'd traded the polite curiosity from our first meeting for something leaner, more focused, the kind of attention a hunter gives to fresh tracks. "Walk me through everything again," she said, clicking a pen. "From the moment you found the box to the phone call with your daughter last night." I told it straight. The porch, the gold trim, Richard lighting up in his den, the collapse, the ICU, the scent of antiseptic that clung to my clothes like a penance, the lab results. And then Emily's voice, honeyed and hollow. "Did you try one when I said I'd given them to Richard?" That brittle little laugh. Morales didn't interrupt. She wrote, nodded, wrote more. When I finished, she leaned back the chair, squeaking. "Aconitine is not an accident," she said. "It's deliberate. It's hard to get harder to dose. Whoever did this planned it." Whoever I echoed, though we both knew the name I wasn't saying. Her gaze flicked to the bagged card. "You're certain it's her handwriting?" "I've watched that hand grow from crayon to checkbook," I said. "I'd know it blind." She nodded again. "We'll send this to our document examiner anyway, and the cigars are already with the tox lab. But evidence is only half the story." Her voice gentled just a notch. "Why would your daughter want you dead, Mr. Carter?" The room cooled. The question had been waiting in the corner since I walked in. Now it stepped into the light. "I don't know when we started missing each other in the same house," I said. "But by the time she married, whatever we'd lost had a price tag on it." Morales waited. I saw the kitchen table from 3 years ago as clearly as I saw her desk now. The cheap sunlight, the sugar bowl with its chipped lid, the stack of mortgage papers Emily slid toward me, her husband's watch, glinting like a small, smug moon. "We found a house. It's perfect. We just need a little help." I told her I couldn't give her the down payment, I said. "Fixed income. Medical bills." She looked at me like I'd slammed a door on her hand. I swallowed. After that, most of our conversations had numbers hiding in them. Not questions about my lungs, questions about beneficiaries. Morales wrote slowly. "Insurance." "Yes," she capped the pen. "Okay, we'll keep working the lab side. I'll also pull any financial filings that connect to you, probate liens, recent changes, just to see who's been looking. In the meantime, don't meet her alone. If she calls record what you can. Keep a log, I already started, I said, surprising myself. Dates times. What she says? What I remember. It helps. She slid me a card with her cell written across the top in block letters. It also protects you. Outside, the air had that metallic bite November carries when it's thinking about snow. I drove the long way home without meaning to, and the long way bent past Emily's neighborhood. I told myself I wasn't looking for her house, then found myself slowing in front of it anyway. The driveway held a new car, sleek white, a kind of white that makes every other white look dirty. In the front window, a pair of silhouettes moved through the living room. Emily's quick hands, the tilt of her head I'd once known better than my own reflection. She laughed, big, unapologetic, and for a moment I wanted to believe the sound belonged to the little girl with scabbed knees who sang along to the radio off-key. But the mahogany box was louder. I didn't knock. I sat at the curb long enough for the sun to fall behind their roofline, then drove home to a house that breathed in the old familiar way, timbers expanding pipes, settling grief, taking its shoes off in the hall. The folder in my study was where it always lived, bottom drawer, top left. Will's insurance policies, the deed Martha and I paid off one thin year at a time. I laid the pages out on the desk like maps to a country I didn't want to visit, and realized two things at once: I hadn't updated any of it since before Martha died, and Emily's name ran through those documents like a river. If I stopped breathing tomorrow, everything flowed in one direction. I didn't change anything that night. I just looked. I let the paper weigh what it weighed. I tried to imagine the shape of Emily's face when she thought about these pages, and hated myself for being able to. Sleep didn't come. I went outside and sat on the porch steps with an old blanket around my shoulders, the security lamp painting the yard in weak gold. Somewhere a dog barked twice and gave up. Pneumonia had left the faintest rasp in my breathing on cold nights, a soft reminder that the body keeps score. I cupped my hands and blew into them and asked the dark questions I already knew would not answer back. The next morning I drove to the cemetery. Martha's stone is simple, no angels. No scrolls, just her name and 2 dates and the word beloved. I brushed away a film of leaves, and as always told her the truth. I don't know when we lost her, I said. But she's not coming back the way we knew her. The wind ran cold fingers through the trees and then was gone. I think she sent me death for my birthday. I stood there long enough for my knees to complain. A groundskeeper waved from the far path. I waved back, a man with nothing obvious in his hands and everything obvious on his face. On my way home, I stopped for coffee, then changed my mind and left with nothing. The barista had Emily's smile, wide, careless, with hope, and for a moment the air tilted. Back at the house, the phone was waiting on the kitchen table like a dare. I picked it up and dialed her number. It rang too long, then clicked. "Dad," she said, smooth as a quiet lake. "I was just thinking about you." "Were you?" "Of course. How are you feeling?" "Did you enjoy your birthday?" "I did," I said, keeping my voice flat, though it was nearly my last. Silence. I could hear her breathing measured. "Don't be dramatic," she said finally. "It was just a gift." "A gift I didn't use," I said. "Richard did. He nearly died." A longer silence, something sharp moving beneath it. When she spoke again, her voice had a new temperature. Well, she said maybe he should have known better. After we hung up, the quiet in the kitchen felt different. Less like absence, more like a verdict. I wrote down the conversation in the spiral notebook I'd pulled from the junk drawer date time. Maybe he should have known better. I underlined it, twice. 2 days bled past in errands I half finished. I checked the mail with the caution of a man who once found a snake in a boot, and never forgot it. At the grocery store, I kept catching my reflection in the freezer cases, an old man with a jaw set like a clamp, and eyes that believed and didn't all at once. Morales called that afternoon. The tox screens had doubled down on what we already knew. The document examiner wanted better samples of Emily's writing birthday cards lists anything. I dug through a shoebox Martha kept beneath the bed and found a half-dozen notes from school years and Christmases. Love you, Daddy. Be home late. Borrowed the car, don't be mad. The lines were the same, quick, decisive, a little proud of themselves. I dropped the copies at the station and signed the chain of custody form with a hand that didn't shake until after the pen left the paper. That evening, I drove the long way again. The long way has a way of telling you the truth you've been ducking. Emily's house glowed warm behind the curtains, the way houses glow in commercials where nobody dies. Her husband, Daniel, crossed the living room with his shoulders tight, as if he were holding two heavy things, and both were invisible. When he reached the window, he looked out and saw me in the truck. We held each other's eyes for just a breath too long, and in that breath I recognized something I hadn't expected fear. Not of me, of her. I went home. I sat in my recliner and listened to the house settle and wondered when my life had become a series of rooms where I watched other people breathe. The phone rang around 9. Morales again. Mr. Carter, she said, we're moving carefully. I know this is slow. Slow is fine, I said. Slow is alive. She exhaled a tired human sound. Keep your routines. Write down everything. And if she contacts you in person, call me the moment she leaves. After we hung up, I turned off every light but the one over the sink and stood in the doorway of the study looking at those papers spread across the desk like a confession. I traced Martha's signature with my eyes and mine, with the guilty knowledge of what they meant to Emily now. Then I closed the folder and slid it back where it belonged. I wasn't ready to be the man who changed everything in one night. Not yet. First, I needed to see my daughter clearly without the lens of nostalgia or the trap of wishing. I needed to watch the way she moved when she thought no one was looking. I needed to understand what I was up against, not the shadow of a little girl, but the shape of a woman who could laugh at a man gasping for air. The house breathed. I breathed with it. Somewhere in the dark, a new part of me, quieter than anger, colder than fear, sat down and folded its hands. If this was going to be a war, it would not be fought with shouting. It would be fought with patience paper and the kind of memory that doesn't fade when the lights go out. 3 years earlier, Emily had come to my kitchen table with her husband, Daniel. That table had seen everything, Martha's Sunday roasts, birthday cakes, with crooked candles, bills spread like battle plans, but nothing prepared me for what my daughter slid across the wood that afternoon. A neat stack of mortgage papers, a glossy photo of a suburban house with shutters too white to be honest, and a smile that wasn't hers anymore. Dad, she said, syrup thick in her voice, we found a place. It's perfect for us. We just need a little help with the down payment. Daniel leaned back in his chair like he already owned the room, his tie knotted too tight, his grin too wide. I remember staring at the numbers printed in black ink zeros, like tiny bullets aimed straight at my savings account. Emily, I said carefully, I can't give you that kind of money. I'm retired. I live on a fixed income. Her smile flickered, then cracked. Daniel leaned forward, his elbows cutting into the wood where Martha used to set fresh bread. But you have assets, he pressed. The house, your pension, life insurance. You don't need all of it. I felt my pulse hammering in my ears. That money is for my medical bills, for me to live on. One day, yes, whatever's left will go to you, but not now, not like this. Emily's face hardened into something I had never seen before, an expression that didn't belong to the daughter I raised. Her eyes narrowed, her lips pressed thin. So you'd rather cling to your money than help me build a life. She snapped. It's not about clinging, I told her. It's about surviving. She left that day without a hug, without looking back. The door closed, but it may as well have slammed shut on the last of our relationship. Now, years later, Morales' question echoed in my head. Why would your daughter want you dead? The answer was clear enough. She hadn't forgiven me. Maybe she never would. That memory sat heavy on me as I spread the folder of documents across my desk again. The will still listed Emily as sole beneficiary. The insurance policy still carried her name. If I didn't make changes soon, then whether by illness, accident, or something far darker, she stood to gain everything. The thought of my little girl counting down the days until my lungs gave out was a cruelty I couldn't shake. But now I knew better. She wasn't counting days. She was cutting them short. I called Jacobs my lawyer. His voice on the phone was slow and deliberate, the way men speak when they've lived long enough to know words can carry weight. You want to change your will, he said. Yes, I told him. Effective immediately. May I ask why I stared at the papers spread before me? Because the person I trusted to care for me one day has already tried to bury me. Jacobs didn't argue. He didn't even sigh. Understood. Who do you want listed instead? I hesitated. Richard came to mind, the man lying in a hospital bed because of a cigar meant for me. Or maybe his family. Maybe even a foundation, something that could outlive both me and Emily's bitterness. Not her, I said finally. Anyone but her. That evening I sat on the porch, a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. The November wind rattled the trees sharp as broken glass. Pneumonia had left me weaker, my lungs scarred. Each breath felt like sandpaper scraping my chest. Survival had already been uphill. Now it was uphill with someone loosening the brakes behind me. The phone rang again. Emily's number. Dad. Her voice was too smooth. I was just thinking about you. Were you? Of course. How are you feeling? I paused, the words heavy in my throat. I did enjoy my birthday, though it was nearly my last. She laughed lightly, dismissively. Oh, Dad, don't be so dramatic. It was just a gift. A gift I didn't use, I said. Richard did. He's barely alive. Another silence. Then her tone shifted glass hard. Well, maybe he should have known better. Her words sliced through me. Not guilt, not denial, calculation. When I hung up, the quiet in the house felt dangerous, like a predator crouching in the dark. I wrote her words in my journal, underlining them twice. Maybe he should have known better. She hadn't just sent me cigars. She'd sent me a message. Richard wasn't the target. I was. The next Sunday, I drove past her house again. I told myself it was just the long way home, but when I saw her car in the driveway gleaming and new, I knew better. Through the window, I caught her silhouette laughing with Daniel, her hand flashing with a diamond bright enough to blind. She looked happy, carefree, as if she hadn't just mailed her father a box of death. I didn't knock. I just sat there in the truck until the sun dipped behind the trees. Then I drove home and pulled the folder out one more time. I stared at the insurance policies, the pension papers, the deed to my house. She hadn't asked about my health in years, but she'd asked about these documents. Again and again. Maybe she hadn't forgotten me after all. Maybe she had been planning. The silence in the house pressed against me, and for the first time I didn't feel like a father betrayed. I felt like prey, and survival meant moving first. The house had always talked to me in its own way, groans in the timbers when the wind shifted pipes, clattering like distant footsteps when the furnace kicked in. But after the cigars, after Emily's phone call, those sounds didn't feel like a house settling anymore. They felt like warnings. Every creak at midnight sounded like someone testing the lock. Every shifting shadow on the wall looked like her face, sharp and cold as the handwriting on that birthday card. I tried to tell myself it was just nerves, but the truth was heavier. This wasn't just paranoia, this was preparation. She'd made her move once, and she would again. 2 days later, Morales called with the lab results, aconitine confirmed. She repeated the same question she'd asked before, though her tone was sharper now. "Mr. Carter, is there any reason your daughter would want you dead?" I thought of the day she slid those mortgage papers across my kitchen table. The way Daniel's tone had hardened when he talked about my assets. The way Emily's smile had vanished when I said no. She's asked for money before I admitted. I told her I couldn't give it. She didn't forgive me. Morales didn't flinch. People kill for less. Her words stuck to me like burrs. That night I sat on the porch with an old blanket pulled tight. The air was sharp enough to sting. My lungs rasped faintly scarred reminders of the pneumonia that had nearly stolen me 2 years ago. I thought about Emily's voice on the phone. Maybe he should have known better. She wasn't impatient anymore. She was done waiting. 3 nights later, the phone rang again. Emily, this time. Her tone carried that same sweetness, but underneath it was something calculated. "Dad," she said, "did you at least like the box I wanted you to feel remembered?" "Remembered?" I asked. "I haven't heard from you in years. And when I do, it nearly kills someone." She laughed, short, brittle. "You always were dramatic. You should try to relax. Stress isn't good for your lungs." I gripped the receiver until my knuckles ached. "You knew I quit smoking. Why would you send me cigars?" Silence stretched long enough for me to hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Then her voice dropped lower. "Because I thought maybe you'd want to remember old times." When I hung up, I sat in the dark, staring at the empty chair across the kitchen table. The same chair where she used to do her homework, swinging her legs, asking for help with spelling words. Now her voice was colder than the wind rattling the windows. I wrote the conversation down in my journal, the ink pressing deep into the page. Stress isn't good for your lungs. The next week, I drove past her house again. I told myself it was coincidence, just the long way home, but when I slowed at the curb, I saw her in the window again. This time she wasn't laughing. She was sitting alone at the dining room table, head bent over a stack of papers, pen moving quickly. Her car in the driveway gleamed like new money. Through the glass, I could see Daniel pacing, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his eyes darting nervously. I didn't stop. I didn't knock. I just watched for a few minutes, then drove away. But the image followed me home. Emily bent over papers, writing furiously as though she were already signing my life away. That night, I pulled out my folder again. The will, the insurance policies, the deed to the house. I studied them until the lines blurred. She hadn't asked about my health in years, but she'd asked about these again and again. Maybe she hadn't forgotten me. Maybe she had been planning. I could feel it in my bones. She wasn't just watching the calendar. She was watching me, and if I wanted to live, I had to watch her back. The surveillance started subtly. A car idling too long at the end of my street. A silhouette that disappeared when I drew the curtain back. Headlights crawling past my house at midnight, too slow to be lost. Coincidence, maybe, but my gut told me otherwise. One night, I turned off all the lights and sat in my recliner with the journal on my lap, the mahogany cigar box still glimmering faintly on the table. I stared at the shadows until my eyes blurred, until I wasn't sure if I was imagining the sound of tires crunching on gravel outside. At 2 a.m, the phone rang. I nearly dropped it. It was Richard's wife again. "Jack," she said, "the doctors confirmed it. It was poison. The cigar?" I thanked her, hung up, and walked to the porch. The night pressed down heavy, the yard silent, except for the faint bark of a dog somewhere down the block. I clenched the railing until my hands shook. "Emily," I whispered into the cold air. "Why are you trying to erase me?" The following Sunday, I caught myself staring at an old photo of Emily when she was 8, Christmas morning, sitting on the used bicycle I'd spent weeks repainting in the garage. Her smile had lit up the whole room, her arms wrapped so tightly around me, I thought my ribs might crack. How did that child grow into the woman who mailed me a coffin in the shape of a cigar box I didn't know? But I knew this much: I wasn't dealing with the girl in the photograph anymore. I was dealing with someone else entirely. And she was watching me. Which meant I had to be ready when she made her next move. I kept putting it off, telling myself there was time, that maybe Emily would come to her senses, that maybe the girl who once hugged me like I was her whole world was still hiding somewhere inside her. But every time the phone rang, every time I caught her silhouette in that window, every time Morales asked me to explain why my daughter might want me gone, I knew I was lying to myself. The papers in my study didn't lie. They spelled it out in black ink and signatures. If I died, everything I had, house pension insurance, flowed straight into Emily's hands. Not because she earned it, not because she loved me, but because decades ago Martha and I had made the natural choice any parents would. Who else would inherit? Who else but our only child? That decision had made sense once. Now it felt like leaving a loaded gun on the table. So one gray Monday morning, I drove to Jacob's office with the folder tucked under my arm. Jacobs was already there, glasses sliding down his nose, stacks of case files leaning against each other like tired men. He looked up, saw my face, and didn't bother with small talk. "You ready?" he said. "Yes." My voice came out flat. "Change the will. Effective immediately." He adjusted his glasses, eyes narrowing. To whom I hesitated. I thought of Richard, how he lay in that hospital bed, tubes in his arms, lungs barely holding on because of a cigar meant for me. I thought of his wife, her hands trembling around a styrofoam cup of coffee. I thought of the neighbors who waved when I brought in their garbage cans. And I thought of the kids at church who still looked at me like I mattered. "Anyone but her," I said finally. Jacobs nodded once. Understood. He slid the papers across to me, his fountain pen heavy in my hand. My signature trembled, but not from weakness, from finality. When it was done, Jacobs leaned back. "You know this won't stop her." "I know," I said, "but it slows her down. She'll have to find another angle." I was right. A week later, I got a letter in the mail. Official letterhead, crisp paper. My eyes snagged on the words, "Petition for Guardianship." Emily's name sat beneath it like a stone on my chest. She wasn't waiting for me to die anymore. She was trying to bury me alive. Guardianship meant control of my finances, my medical decisions, my life. If the court bought her story, I wouldn't need a coffin. I'd already be in one. I drove straight to Jacobs, the letter shaking in my hand. He read it silently, his lips pressed thin. "Guardianship," he muttered. "That's bold." "She wants to prove I'm incompetent," I said. "Strip me of my own decisions. Do not underestimate her, Jack. These cases can be dangerous. Judges take them seriously. If she brings doctors, neighbors, even a few receipts out of context, it can look bad." "I'm 67, I snapped. "Not senile." Jacobs raised an eyebrow. "Then we fight." Carefully, and fight we did. The hearing came 2 weeks later in a courthouse that smelled of old wood and stale coffee. I wore the best suit I owned, the one Martha had pressed before her last Sunday service. Jacobs stood beside me, calm as a lighthouse. Emily arrived with a lawyer who looked like he charged by the breath. She wore black, as though she were already mourning me. Her expression was calm, her chin lifted, but her eyes flicked toward me with a sharpness that cut deeper than any blade. The judge, a woman with gray hair pulled tight, and eyes that saw too much, opened the session. petition for guardianship over Mr. Jack Carter. Ms. Hale, you may begin. Emily rose gracefully. Her voice was syrupy, practiced. Your Honor, my father has been declining. He forgets tasks, leaves his door unlocked, neglects his health. I fear for his safety. She gestured toward her lawyer, who produced affidavits and papers like a magician pulling rabbits from a hat, testimony from neighbors' records from the pharmacy, even statements from family friends. Each page was a nail hammered into the coffin she wanted to build around me. Whispers stirred through the courtroom. The judge turned to me. Mr. Carter, how do you respond? I stood slowly, feeling every one of my years in my spine, but none in my voice. Your Honor, I may not be young, but I am not incompetent. I have managed my home, my finances, and my health with more care than my daughter has ever managed her marriage. Gasps rippled through the room. Emily's face flushed red, but I didn't stop. I held up the leather-bound journal I had kept since the day the mahogany box appeared. I have documented every interaction. Dates, times, exact words. Neighbors pressured. Pharmacists misled. A campaign designed not to protect me, but to control me. Jacobs stepped forward, handing the judge copies of my will, my insurance updates, and my medical records, all neatly in order. This is not a man incapable of managing his affairs, Jacobs said evenly. This is a man targeted by greed. The judge flipped through the papers, her brow tightening. Then she looked at Emily. Ms. Hale, it is unusual for a daughter to seek guardianship of a parent who maintains this level of organization and independence. I see more evidence of calculation on your part than decline on his. Her lawyer tried to object, but the judge silenced him with a look. Petition denied. The gavel struck like thunder. Outside, Emily cornered me near the steps. Her mask had slipped, now replaced with something raw and venomous. You think this is over, she hissed. You think one ruling will stop me. I met her eyes steady and calm. It won't stop you, but it will slow you down. And every day you waste chasing my death, I'll be living. Her lips trembled with rage. You'll regret this. No, I said quietly. You will. She turned sharply, her heels cracking against the stone steps, her lawyer trailing behind. I stood there in the fading afternoon light, lungs burning from the cold air, and knew the battle wasn't finished. It had only shifted. If she couldn't kill me with cigars, and she couldn't bury me with guardianship, then she would find another way. And I had to be ready. The envelope looked ordinary, the kind of thing you toss on the counter with grocery receipts and gas bills. But ordinary things can carry the deepest cuts. I slit it open with my old pocket knife, the same one Martha had given me for our 10th anniversary, and read the first line. Property deed reassigned. Signature verified. I froze. The paper shook in my hand as I traced the scrolled name at the bottom. It was mine, or at least it pretended to be. The loops, the angles, the slant of the J in Jack. To a stranger, it looked perfect. To me, it was an imposter wearing my face. Emily. The realization burned hotter than the pneumonia ever had. She hadn't won in court, so now she was forging her way through my life one document at a time. The next morning, I stormed into the bank with the letter clenched tight enough to crumple. The branch manager, a young man with too much gel in his hair and too little sense of history in his eyes, greeted me with a professional smile. It evaporated when I slapped the letter down on his desk. I never authorized this, I said flatly. That is not my signature. He studied it, then glanced nervously back at me. Mr. Carter, it went through all verification channels. The notary confirmed it. We even have a witness statement. Witness? My voice sharpened. Who? He hesitated. Your daughter, Emily Hale. I let out a bitter laugh. So the witness to my signature was the very person who forged it. His face drained of color. Sir, if that's true, it is true, I snapped. "And if this bank doesn't reverse it immediately, you'll be defending yourself in court alongside her." Back in Jacobs's office, I dropped the letter on his desk. He adjusted his glasses and read every word, his jaw tightening. "She's clever," he muttered. "Forgery, false witness, notary manipulation. This isn't a desperate child, Jack. This is calculated fraud." "She wants me stripped bare," I said quietly. "If guardianship failed, she'll starve me out instead." Jacobs leaned back. "We can fight this. But we'll need proof beyond handwriting. Forensics, paper trails, financial records. Things even she can't explain away. Details," I murmured. "That's where I live." That night I opened the old filing cabinet in my study. Martha used to tease me about my obsession with keeping receipts from as far back as the 70s. One day she'd laugh, "You'll bury us in paperwork." She never guessed how right she'd be. I laid out decades of documents across the desk like soldiers in formation, mortgage payments, tax returns, even the admission card from Martha's last hospital stay, signed in my hand. Then I compared them to the forgery. The difference was subtle, but it screamed at me. My K's always ended with a hard, upward flick. The forgery sagged, limp and uncertain. My T's crossed twice, firm and deliberate. Hers drooped like broken branches. To a stranger, it was close enough. To me, it was a stranger's mask. The next morning, Jacobs and I sat across from a forensic handwriting expert, a small woman with sharp eyes that seemed to see through paper. She studied the signatures with a magnifier, tracing every line with a pen light. "This isn't yours," she said finally. "Not even close. Whoever did this was anxious under pressure. They tried too hard to be perfect, and in trying, revealed themselves." Jacobs smiled grimly. "That's what I needed to hear. We'll subpoena the notary records, too. If she pulled someone into this, we'll drag them into the light. I thought I was ready for the storm." I wasn't. A week later, walking home from church, Emily's car pulled up beside me. She rolled down the window, her smile sharp enough to cut. "Need a ride, Dad?" she called. "Or are you still capable of walking on your own?" I kept moving. She eased forward, matching my pace. "Why are you fighting me?" Her voice dropped low, venomous. "Do you want to spend your last years drowning in bills and paperwork and hospitals?" I stopped turning to face her. "I'd rather drown with dignity than float on your mercy." Her eyes flashed. "You think the court will believe you over me? I'm younger, sharper. I have connections. You have old papers and your word. Old papers," I said, stepping closer, "and a truth that doesn't fade. That's all I need." She leaned in, her voice a hiss. "You should have just signed it over willingly. You're only delaying the inevitable." And then, with a smirk, she gunned the engine and sped off gravel, spitting like venom from the tires. That night I sat at my desk, long after midnight, the forged deed, and the handwriting samples spread out in front of me. The mahogany cigar box still sat on the kitchen table, empty but heavy with meaning. Emily had made her move again. But if she thought she could erase me with ink and lies, she had forgotten who taught her patience in the first place. This war wouldn't be fought with fists. It would be fought with paper evidence and time, and this time I would not just defend, I would strike back. The war shifted from paper to whispers. It started with Mrs. Patterson, the widow, across the street who never missed a detail. She came over one morning, clutching her cardigan at the neck. "Jack," she said, concern dripping from her voice, "Emily told me you've been leaving your front door wide open at night. Said she's worried sick about you." I stared at her, the coffee mug cooling in my hand. "My door has 3 locks, Margaret. I check them twice before bed." Her smile faltered. She excused herself, but the damage was done. The seed had been planted. At the pharmacy the following week, the clerk squinted at me like I was a stranger. "Sir, your daughter mentioned you sometimes forget your prescriptions. We've been advised to keep an eye out." I bit back the urge to slam my fist on the counter. Instead, I took the bag, thanked her, and walked out, my ears burning with humiliation. By Sunday service, the whispers were running wild. Poor Jack. He's not all there anymore. Good thing Emily's stepping in. I knew then that she wasn't just trying to strip me of property. She was poisoning reputations the same way she poisoned cigars. And this time, the target wasn't just my assets. It was my credibility. That night, I pulled out my leather journal, the one that had become my lifeline, and began writing with more purpose than ever. I documented every rumor, every sideways glance, every word spoken in my presence. Dates, times, names. If Emily wanted to drag me into court again, I'd bring the truth bound in leather. The pages filled quickly. I wrote about Mrs. Patterson's worried expression, about the pharmacy clerk's hesitation, about the whispers in the church foyer. I wrote about the feeling of being followed by headlights that lingered too long behind me, about the car that slowed in front of my house at midnight and then sped away. Each entry became a soldier in an army I was quietly building. A week later, the phone rang. Emily's voice oozed through the line, sweet as syrup. "Dad," she said, "I heard you've been having trouble. Bill's medicine. Doors left unlocked. People are worried." Funny, I thought. I'd heard the same thing. Out loud, I said, "Rumors travel fast, don't they?" She didn't answer right away. Then, sharp as broken glass. "You can make this easy, you know. Just sign over power of attorney. You won't have to go through the embarrassment of a hearing." I laughed, an ugly sound I hadn't heard from my own chest in years. "Embarrassment, Emily. The only embarrassment here is you." The line went dead. I set the receiver down gently, then picked up my pen and wrote the whole exchange in my journal, underlined, twice sign over power of attorney. 2 weeks later, the courthouse again. The air smelled of old varnish and stale coffee. I wore the same suit Martha had pressed years ago, my journal tucked under my arm. Jacobs stood at my side, calm as ever. Emily walked in with her lawyer, both dressed like undertakers. Her black dress was cut sharp, her face carefully composed, but her eyes gave her away. They darted across the room, quick and nervous. "Your Honor," she began, voice smooth. "My father has been declining. He forgets tasks, neglects his health. I fear for his safety." Her lawyer rose, producing affidavits from neighbors, testimony from pharmacists, statements from family friends. The stack of papers grew like a mountain on the judge's bench. Whispers rippled through the courtroom. The judge turned to me. "Mr. Carter, how do you respond?" I stood, my knees aching, but my voice steady. I held up the journal. "Your Honor, I have documented every conversation, every rumor, every word since the day my daughter began this campaign. Dates, times, exact phrases, neighbors pressured, pharmacists misled, a slander machine designed not to protect me, but to control me." Jacob stepped forward, laying down copies of my updated will, my insurance policies, and my medical records, all in order, every signature verified. "This is not a man incapable of managing his affairs," Jacobs said evenly. "This is a man targeted by greed." The judge flipped through the papers, her expression tightening. Then she turned to Emily. "Ms. Hale," she said, her voice sharp as the gavel. "It is unusual for a daughter to seek guardianship of a father who maintains this level of organization and independence. I see more evidence of calculation on your part than decline on his." Emily's lawyer opened his mouth, but the judge silenced him with a look. Petition denied. The gavel struck like thunder. Outside, Emily cornered me on the courthouse steps. The mask was gone, now replaced by raw fury. "You think this is over," she hissed. "You think one ruling will stop me." I met her eyes, calm and cold. "It won't stop you, but it will slow you down. And every day you waste chasing my death, I'll be living." Her lips curled into a sneer. "You'll regret this." No, I said, stepping past her. You will. That night back at home, I sat with the mahogany cigar box on the table and the journal in my lap. The box gleamed in the lamplight, empty but heavy with meaning. Emily had failed in court, but I knew she wouldn't stop. She would only get bolder. And I would be ready. Because this wasn't just survival anymore. This was war. The knock came on a Friday evening sharp against the doorframe, as if it carried more intent than courtesy. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, there stood Emily, smiling too wide, holding a covered dish. Dad, she said sweetly, I thought you could use a home-cooked meal. Just like old times. The scent of stew drifted up beef onions, a trace of something bitter beneath it. My stomach turned not from hunger, but from suspicion. She brushed past me into the kitchen, setting the dish on the table, like it was an offering. I know you get tired. I know cooking is hard these days. I studied her face. Her eyes didn't hold warmth. They held calculation. Emily, I said, keeping my voice, even you haven't brought me a meal since Martha's funeral. She gave a small laugh. Maybe I'm trying to make up for lost time? The stew simmered, steam curling toward the ceiling. Emily ladled some into a bowl and pushed it toward me. Go ahead, she said. Tell me if it tastes familiar. I stared at it. The broth was rich, dark, but there was a sharpness in the smell, a chemical tang that didn't belong. My hand hovered over the spoon, then stopped. Why don't you eat with me? I asked. Her smile faltered just slightly. I already had dinner. Then have a bite anyway. For old time's sake. Silence stretched. Her jaw tightened. Then, before she could respond, the front door creaked open. Daniel stepped in his shoulders, sagging his eyes, darting from me to Emily, to the steaming bowl on the table. What's going on here? He asked quietly. Dinner, Emily said too quickly. Just dinner. His gaze dropped to the bowl, and something in his face crumbled. Emily, he whispered, what did you do? She stiffened. Don't start. But Daniel wasn't listening to her anymore. He turned to me, his voice shaking. Mr. Carter, don't eat that. Please don't. The air thickened, heavy as smoke. Emily's hand shot out, grabbing his wrist. Shut up, she hissed. But Daniel yanked free, his voice rising. Tell him what you put in it. Her face twisted, anger flooding out. You think you're so righteous. You think you can undermine me. Emily, I said softly. What's in the stew? She glared at me, her lips pressed into a thin, hateful line. Then she grabbed the dish, flung it against the wall. It shattered broth splattering across the wallpaper, meat and vegetables, sliding down in a mess that stank of more than food. Daniel's chest heaved. He turned to me, eyes wet. I can't do this anymore. She's been planning everything. The cigars, the papers, the stories. All of it. Emily's voice cracked like a whip. Stop talking. But he didn't stop. His words spilled out like a dam breaking. She wanted me to help her with the cigars. She forged your signature on those deeds. She told me to back her in court. He swallowed hard. She said the only way forward was without you. The room spun around me, the walls pressing in. I'd known deep down, but hearing it in his voice felt like being struck. Emily lunged for him, fury in her eyes, but I stepped between them, my hands trembling. Enough, I said. No more lies. No more pretending. Daniel backed away, shaking his head. I can't live like this. I can't be part of this. He looked at me with a mixture of guilt and relief. You need to call Morales. Tell her everything. I'll testify. Emily's face was a mask of rage. You'll regret this, Daniel. Both of you. She stormed out the door, slamming hard enough to rattle the windows. The silence left behind was louder than any shout. Daniel sank into a chair, his head in his hands. I thought she just wanted security, a house, a future, but this is madness. I sat opposite him, the mahogany cigar box glinting faintly from the counter, silent testimony to how far she'd already gone. "You've done the right thing," I told him. My voice was steady, though my heart pounded. "But it won't stop here. She'll keep pushing." He nodded miserably. "I know, but I can't cover for her anymore. Not when it's life and death." I opened my journal and wrote every word down his confession, his tone the shattered stew dish dripping down the wall. Evidence. Proof. The war had just shifted again. Emily had overplayed her hand and Daniel had broken ranks. For the first time in months, I felt something like hope. But I also knew what came next. Desperation makes people reckless. And Emily was about to get more dangerous than ever. The first frost of December clung to the grass, brittle and white, when I stepped out to start my truck. The air stung my lungs, every breath sharp against the scars pneumonia had left behind. I turned the key, the engine coughed, then roared to life. For a moment I thought it was just another ordinary morning. But when I backed down the driveway, the brake pedal slid straight to the floor. The truck rolled forward faster, the steering wheel rattling in my grip. I yanked the handbrake tires, shrieking, the truck skidding sideways until it slammed to a halt inches from the oak at the end of the lane. My chest heaved, sweat breaking across my skin despite the cold. I climbed out, legs trembling, and stared at the ground. A thin trail of fluid glistened across the driveway. The brake line had been cut. Later that day, Morales stood with me in the garage, crouched by the wheel well with a flashlight. Her jaw tightened as she traced the line with a gloved finger. "This wasn't wear and tear," she said flatly. "This was deliberate. Clean cut. Someone wanted you to crash." I didn't need her to say the name. It was already hammering in my head. "Emily." "Detective," I said quietly, "how much longer are we going to pretend this is circumstantial?" She looked at me, the flashlight beam carving shadows across her face. "I can't arrest her on suspicion alone. We need proof, solid, undeniable, something a jury can't ignore." Her words sank into me like ice. She was right. Poisoned cigars, forged deeds, rumors, they all painted a picture, but pictures could be dismissed. A cut brake line, though. If we could catch her in the act, it would end. Morales leaned closer. "Let us wire your property. Hidden surveillance. Cameras in the garage, on the porch near the car. If she comes back, we'll have her." I swallowed hard. The thought of turning my home into a trap made my stomach twist, but I nodded. "Do it." 2 nights later, I sat in the dark living room, the only light coming from the muted TV. Outside, the yard lay under a skin of frost, silent, waiting. The detectives' team had been in and out, discreet and efficient. Tiny cameras blinked invisibly from corners and rafters. I clutched my journal, its pages thick with dates and details, and listened. The house creaked, pipes groaned. The silence pressed in. At 2 a.m., headlights swept across the wall. I stood slowly, careful not to make a sound, and peered through the curtain. Her car, parked at the curb, engine off. The door opened. Emily stepped out, her coat pulled tight, her hair shining under the street lamp. She moved quickly like someone with purpose. I watched her cross the lawn, kneel by the truck, and pull something from her bag. A wrench. Her movements were sharp, practiced. She crouched at the wheel, well, hands busy, breath visible in the cold air. The cameras caught everything. My heart pounded in my chest, torn between rushing out and staying hidden. But Morales's words echoed, "Let us catch her." So I stood in the shadows and watched my daughter try to kill me again. The next morning, Morales came to collect the footage. She set the laptop on my kitchen table and played it back. There she was, Emily, kneeling in the frost, her face illuminated by the street lamp. Clear as daylight. Methodical. Intentional. My throat closed as I watched. This wasn't speculation anymore. This wasn't paranoia. This was my daughter, my flesh and blood, committing murder in the making. When the video ended, Morales closed the laptop gently, as if the evidence itself were fragile. "This is it," she said. "This is what we needed." I nodded, but I couldn't speak. My chest ached with something deeper than fear, grief so sharp it left no room for air. Because the truth was no longer a whisper in the dark. It was on tape. That evening I sat in my recliner with the journal on my lap, the mahogany cigar box gleaming faintly on the table. I thought of Emily as a little girl, her laughter as she rode that bicycle I'd repainted, her arms wrapped tight around me, her voice calling me Daddy, with a sweetness I hadn't heard in decades. And then I thought of the woman on that video, crouched in the frost, cutting the brakes of her father's truck. Two faces, same person. I pressed my hand to my chest, trying to steady my breathing. The next step was clear. Morales would make the arrest. The courts would decide the punishment. But nothing could undo the truth burned into that footage my daughter had chosen. Greed over blood calculation. Over love. And I had watched her do it with my own eyes. The morning of the arrest was colder than usual, a sharp wind cutting through the bare trees that lined my street. I sat at the kitchen table with my journal open, though I wasn't writing. I just stared at the pages, at the rows of careful notes, at the words that proved what my heart could barely accept. A knock rattled the door. When I opened it, Morales stood there with two uniformed officers behind her. She didn't waste words. "We're moving now, Mr. Carter. We have the footage, the poison reports, the forged deeds." "It's enough." I nodded. My throat was too tight to answer. From the window, I watched as the cruiser pulled up outside Emily's house. She stepped onto the porch, her coat flaring in the wind, confusion etched across her face. Then she saw the officers, saw Morales, saw the handcuffs. Her voice carried across the yard, shrill and furious. "This is a mistake, he's lying. My father's sick, he doesn't know what he's saying." But Morales held up the laptop. The frozen image of Emily crouched by my truck, glowing on the screen. The fight drained from her like water down a sink. When the cuffs clicked shut, my knees weakened. I gripped the window frame until the cruiser rolled away, tail lights fading into the gray morning. I had wanted this moment for months, justice safety proof. But as the car disappeared, all I felt was hollow. My daughter was gone long before the handcuffs, but watching her taken away carved the loss into stone. The trial began 3 months later. The courthouse smelled of polish and old paper, the air humming with whispers and the clicking of reporters' pens. Emily sat at the defense table in a pale blue blouse, her hair neatly pinned. She looked more like the daughter I remembered, and that made it harder. Her lawyer painted her as a misunderstood caretaker, a daughter desperate to protect her aging father. They called me paranoid, confused, weakened by illness. They spun every rumor she had planted into supposed truth. But then Morales took the stand. She described the poison in the cigars, the brake line cut clean through the forged deeds. She showed the jury the surveillance footage, the glowing street lamp, Emily crouched with a wrench in hand. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. When it was my turn, Jacob squeezed my shoulder as I rose. I walked to the stand slowly, my lungs rasping in the cold air of the courtroom. The Bible felt heavy in my hand as I swore the oath. The prosecutor's voice was gentle. "Mr. Carter, do you recognize the woman in this video?" I looked at the screen. My throat closed. "Yes," I whispered. "That's my daughter. Did she send you a box of cigars for your birthday?" "Yes." "Were those cigars tested?" "They were. Poisoned. Did she attempt to take legal control of your assets?" "She did." "And did she attempt to tamper with your vehicle?" The image of her crouched in the frost filled the room again. I swallowed hard. Yes, the prosecutor nodded. And despite all of this, you've come forward today. I have. The defense attorney rose for cross-examination, his tone sharp. Mr. Carter, isn't it true you've struggled with your health? That you've suffered memory lapses? I've struggled with pneumonia, I said evenly. But my memory is fine. I remember every attempt my daughter made on my life. The lawyer pressed, tried to twist my words, but the journal lay open before me, page after page of notes, dates, quotes. I answered each question calmly, with evidence to back it. When it ended, I stepped down my legs, shaking. I caught Emily's eyes as I passed. For a moment, I thought I saw the little girl who once wrapped her arms around me. But then her face hardened, lips pressed thin, and I knew the girl I remembered was gone. The jury deliberated only 2 hours. Guilty, the foreman said. Voice steady. On all counts, attempted murder, fraud, forgery. The judge's gavel cracked through the room. Emily Hale, you are hereby sentenced to 15 years in state prison. Her scream echoed against the walls, fury and disbelief tangled together. Dad, you did this? You betrayed me. I closed my eyes. Betrayed. The word cut deep, but not the way she intended. Because I knew the truth, she had betrayed me long before I ever stepped into that courtroom. As they led her away, chains clinking softly, my chest ached. Not with pride, not with victory, with grief. I had survived. But I had lost my daughter. That night back at home, I sat with the cigar box on the table, its gold trim catching the lamplight. I thought of Martha, of the promises we'd made as young parents to protect our child, to give her everything. I thought of the laughter that once filled this house, the warmth of family dinners. And then I thought of the cold, deliberate hand that cut a brake line in the frost. 15 years, the law had done its part. But no sentence could return what I'd lost. The house was quiet again, not the kind of quiet that comes from fear, the kind that gnawed at me when I thought every creak was Emily outside my door, but a gentler quiet. A silence that let me breathe. Winter thawed into spring. I spent more time on the porch watching sparrows bicker at the feeder, watching the tulips Martha planted years ago push up through the soil like stubborn survivors. The oak tree at the end of the drive still bore the scar where my truck nearly met it, but even that seemed less like a wound now and more like a reminder I had endured. People in town stopped whispering. Neighbors brought pies, shook my hand, lingered at the gate. Richard, fully recovered, dropped by with his wife, and we sat in lawn chairs laughing softly like men who had both stared death in the eye and decided not to blink. Daniel even came once, shoulders slumped, face older than his years. He apologized, said he had no excuse, and though part of me wanted to slam the door, I let him talk. He had been trapped in her orbit, same as me. Some chains take time to see, but the nights were still hardest. That was when memories crept in Emily, as a girl running barefoot through the grass, shouting for me to watch her cartwheels. Emily blowing out birthday candles, cheeks puffed, eyes bright. Emily hugging me so tightly after I fixed her bicycle that I thought my ribs would snap. And then the image would twist. Emily crouched under the street lamp, cutting my brake line. Emily laughing when Richard nearly died. Emily standing in court, venom in her voice, calling me the betrayer. 2 Emilys, 1 daughter, and I carried both inside me. I tended to the garden that spring, hands in the dirt, sweat on my brow. There's something honest about soil. It doesn't lie, doesn't plot. You plant, you water, you wait. And if you're patient, life grows. The cigar box still sat on the kitchen shelf, polished and empty. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. It was a symbol now not of death, but of survival. Every time I looked at it, I remembered what I had faced and what I had overcome. The journal grew thick with pages. Not just evidence anymore. Thoughts, memories, lessons I wanted to leave behind, not for Emily, not anymore, but for anyone who needed to hear them. Because survival isn't just about breath in your lungs. It's about choosing to live even after betrayal. One evening, I sat on the porch as the sun dipped low, the sky burning with orange and purple. I thought of Martha, of how she would have held my hand through every step, how she would have cried and prayed and still found a way to smile. I spoke aloud, not to anyone in particular, maybe to her, maybe to myself. I've lost a daughter, I said. But I've found myself again, and that has to be enough. Because life is fragile. It can break under the weight of greed, or it can bend and keep growing. Mine had bent farther than I thought possible. But it hadn't broken. And now to you, whoever's hearing this story, I want you to take something from it. Betrayal cuts deep. It shatters trust, twists memories, leaves scars you think will never heal. But survival is more than just outlasting what's thrown at you. It's refusing to let it define you. It's choosing every morning to keep breathing, to keep planting, to keep hoping. If you've ever been hurt by someone you loved, know this: their choices do not erase your worth. You can still stand. You can still live. I survived my daughter's betrayal not because I'm stronger than anyone else, but because I chose not to let her darkness become mine. So if this story touched you, if it reminded you of your own strength, I'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me where you're listening from. And if you want more stories like this, stories of resilience, of survival, of the human heart tested but unbroken, make sure to subscribe. Because together, we keep each other alive.